So here we are, guys, currently staring right into the face of one of my all-time favourite aircraft. This is the Jetstream. The Jetstream 32 is the particular model, and this is by JRollon or JRollon in X-Plane 10.4. As a side note, 10.41 is available. I'm just not running it currently. I haven't upgraded yet. However, this is X-Plane 10. And this is the JRollon Jetstream 32. Now, the astute of you who follow my channel will be fully aware of the fact I've already done a review on this particular aircraft. So the question then is, why am I doing another video on it? Well, this aircraft has recently been subject to a community update. And okay, what's a community update when it's at home? Well, it is as follows. This aircraft, when I reviewed it some time ago, I came up and identified a number of fairly significant failings on the part of the aircraft. Now, what it meant was that my summary was that it's a flawed gem, i.e. those failings didn't completely detract from the overall experience of operating the aircraft. You could still operate it, you could still fly it, you could still work it, and you could still maintain the enjoyment of it. However, what they did do is they meant that you had to take extra precautions or be careful or be mindful of certain handling traits or certain characteristic traits that really you didn't need to be quite so cautious of in real life, and they did detract from the overall package, hence why I said it was a flawed gem. Now what's happened is we have a community update. So what's happened is a gentleman by the name of Tony, who goes as MaxWaldorf in the various X-Plane forums, has taken it off his own back to decide to try and address some of the areas where there are problems, inconsistencies or whatever with this aircraft, with this add-on. And he's now released that as a, well, I say he's released that, that's part of where it comes into the idea of a community update. Because the element of the question is, well, what on earth is a community update? Well, I'll give you another example. This is X-Plane 10.4. This is Coventry Airport. Now, the original X-Plane 10, to the best of my knowledge, Coventry Airport was basically a strip of tarmac, very poor, with no details and a couple of taxiways and no buildings and no bits added on. Such is the community in X-Plane 10 that the community are a restless bunch, and they will always try and improve something if they've got an opportunity to do so. And so somebody's updated Coventry Airport. Now, X-Plane 10 as a whole, the designers have picked up on the fact that they've gone, oh, hang on a minute, the community wants to do this, that and that, this, that and t'other. Why not get all of our brains together? So what you have now is a community developed airport which is supported and can be downloaded and installed and used as part of the updates of the official X-Plane 10 updates and the official X-Plane 10 downloads. So in effect what you've got is the two working hand in hand. So you've got basically what would have previously been a freeware or airport, now officially supported by X-Plane 10 within the package as a whole. Far better than previous. In addition, it's got some personal attention to detail, so those who've been to Coventry do indeed know that they park aircraft over here for either maintenance or just for long-term parking. And overall, the community has made a significant improvement to one of the smaller regional airfields in the UK. And the thing is, it's one of those airfields that if you're doing a list of airfields that you want to improve, if you're the developer with limited resources, Coventry probably isn't going to be very high on your list of priorities. However, to the community, if you're someone who lives near Coventry or flies into and out of it regularly, it might just be that you want to do your own one. Now, there are tools that are freely available that make it relatively easy to design scenery for X-Plane 10, and that's obviously what's gone on here. And consequently what's happened is that as a result of all of that, we now have Coventry Airport in X-Plane 10 as a result of the community effort. So going back to this, what we have is a payware aircraft where a member of the community has gone, hey, you know what, this thing does have some flaws, so I'm going to try and address them. Now, it's community in as much as it's not officially sanctioned by JRollon or either of the two distributors, they being X-Aviation or xplane.org store. However, it's obviously not frowned upon because you can get it it comes as part of the latest package if you download it, or if you've got a previous version you just re-download it and it comes as part of that. So in effect it's free. It comes with the official one. It's therefore optional if you wish to use it. The caveat is, of course, that by virtue of it not being officially supported, if you run into problems, then you can't start jumping up and down and having a go at JRollon or X-Aviation, or for that matter xplane.org's store. However, I have installed this. I have followed the instructions to copy the files across from the community updated version into the, if you like, the normal version, and I've encountered absolutely no problems whatsoever. That's not to say that that would be the case for everyone, hence the caveat, but fundamentally I've transferred it across. So I've copied the files, I've transferred the files across from the community update folder into the main folder and had absolutely no problems. So without further ado, let's start to discuss what has actually changed. So here we are in the marvellous cockpit then, and actually one of the things I really like about this aircraft is how atmospheric the cockpit is. It's beautiful. It's a really nice environment. If any of you have ever been in a Jetstream cockpit for either the 31, the 32, or in the case I was in the Jetstream T2, it's rather a snug environment. It's not the most roomy of environments, and I wasn't a pilot, I was an observer, so for the low-level stuff we would end up clambering in and out of this seat, and trying to squeeze through that gap into there when you're 6'2" is rather a balletic experience for whilst you're flying along through the air. But there we go, nonetheless. So there were three real issues that hit me. Now the actual change list, having had contact with Tony, is about 25, maybe 30 items long, and lots of them are, you know, tidying stuff up, tweaks, you know, little bits and bobs, changing reflections or illumination, changes between select buttons and whatnot, whether lights turn off or off in certain circumstances. So they all go to the overall atmosphere. However, there are three biggies that I would want to investigate, because they're the three biggies that affected me when I did the initial review. So here's our throttles, and they are part and parcel of it. As you can see, the throttle has graduations: max, flight idle, and ground idle. Now the issue is that when I did the actual initial review, one of the things is somewhere here is a threshold. You've got no physical detent in the joystick, you've got no physical detent in the throttles, you've got no physical detent at all, and basically what happens is as soon as you nudge over a millimetre over this threshold in the original one, the blades would go into ground beta range, which means they fine off completely, they go flat against the airstream, they cause huge amounts of drag, the aircraft loses speed rapidly. Inevitably, if you're in an approach phase, what you also get is an approach to the stall, a very rapid approach to the stall, with the stall warners starting to blare. You also get a very strong nose down pitching behaviour, and in essence, if you can imagine being in a manually flown IMC approach 300 feet off the ground, you retard the throttles a little bit too much to control your speed, you just nudge into that range. Next thing you know, the blades go flat, the massive drag, speed drops, nose pitches down. You're only at 300 feet, so the chances of getting out are pretty slim. Which meant that actually you just had to fly conservatively. So you'd take the throttles back as far as you dare, and then you wouldn't go any further back. And occasionally you'd just drop them a little bit back, and then you go, and off you'd go. You'd go down into the ground again. So it was an irritant, but it's something you could fly around. However, the change that Tony's made is now that it won't go into ground beta mode whilst in the air. Basically, he's added an interlock. Now, in real life, you would have a gate, and to go past the gate, some aircraft you would lift throttles, others you rock them inboard or outboard, and then others you would actually just have a little catch that you would lift up. And I'm guessing it's a catch here on the 32. I can't remember from when I was wanging around in these things as an observer. But nonetheless, that would then allow you to go into ground idle and then further on into reverse. But fundamentally, at the moment, that's where we're at, is that Tony has removed the capacity to go into ground idle during the normal throw or range of movement of your add-on throttles. Now, obviously, if you have something like the Thrustmaster Warthog, you can assign the detent, going past the detent to that purpose. Or it might be, for example, that you've got the Cytex and you want the little switches just beneath each throttle to act as going into ground beta. But fundamentally, as it stands, with the beta range, it will not let you go into ground beta whilst in the air. So you do not get that unpleasant scenario of hearing the prop tone changing massively, nose pitching down, speed going off, stall warner in your ear. That one is fixed. We'll have a look at that in the air. The second one is down here. Previously, there was some. I don't quite know how it was set up. The props in this aircraft both turn the same way. As you look at them from the front, they turn clockwise. So if you imagine, cut the aircraft off here with a hacksaw. If this was just the wing and just the prop, if the prop's trying to turn that way, the wing would want to try and turn that way. It's the torque effect, or the torque from the engine acting on the prop and the wing. Now what was happening was that torque effect with the two engines, it was almost as if the engines were both being put on the centre line, the longitudinal axis of the aircraft, and when that torque response happened with both engines in effect in line on that longitudinal line, you had a massive torque response, absolutely huge from these things. Completely disproportionate. You were using a good 85-90% of your aileron trim just to try and maintain straight and level flight if you're at high power. Straight flight, I should say, if you're in a high power climb out. There's no aircraft I've encountered where you have to use so much trim just to climb the aircraft. Most aircraft aileron trim is neutral for takeoff. Certainly all that I've encountered. Rudder trim, it depends on the engines. You might have a couple of notches of right rudder trim or left rudder trim, depends on the aircraft and depends on the profile of the aircraft. I mean, this, with the way the blades are, you're going to get some yaw effect from the engines, even if they're running at the same power. But you're not going to get a massive roll effect. Certainly not to the effect that was in the original model. Now, as I understand it, that's a limitation of how it was coded within X-Plane 10. And I'm not quite sure, I'm not a coder or a programmer or anything like that, so I'm not quite sure why it was the way it was, but I know certainly it's taken Tony quite a lot of effort to sit down and work through the maths and the figures and all of the theory behind it to get shall we say, a more representative model. Now the Jetstream 32, I mean, I flew the T2, which is the Royal Navy variant, albeit I was never a pilot. I was crew at the time, but certainly the amount of aileron response to power changes was nothing compared to what the first variant of this had. So it'll be interesting to see what we've got now in terms of the response to the engines. Certainly I recall that it was a little bit, when it hadn't flown, it was a little bit prone to wandering. I wouldn't say it was unstable, but I'd say it was prone to wandering from that, once you've set the position. It was a little bit prone to wandering, but nothing too exciting, certainly. Certainly not as exciting as having a massive wing drop just as you lift off the ground, which is what the original had. And then really the third thing is back in here. The third thing is back inside, and it's this little bad boy here. In fact, if I do it this view, it's better. The control lock. Now, the Jetstream, as indeed do many turboprops, have control locks. Not an issue, says I. Basically, it's often called a gust lock as well, but generally what they do is they stop the controls flapping around if there's exterior input, i.e. the wind goes against the controls and starts thrashing them around. It's not generally a problem with the rudder because they are linked through various linkages and pulleys and levers to the nose wheel. So in essence, there's enough stability in that system that you don't generally need to put a control lock in. And in any case, you would want the rudders to be free and available to work whilst you're taxiing, because you can get up to, depending on the aircraft, you can get between 7 and 13 degrees of nose wheel authority just through the pedals alone. If you want more, then that's when you'd go over and use the fandangled handle tiller. However, generally speaking, the only thing the control locks would affect would be the yoke. So with the control lock on, you can see if I move my joystick, nothing happens. With the control lock off, you can see it now works. Now the way the control lock worked previously, and having had a look through some of the threads from Javier in various forums, basically to simulate it, what was needed was that in effect the aircraft disengaged disengaged the axis, the control axis. So in effect, when you used this lever, what it did was it said that I do not want my aileron and pitch to be controlled by my yoke anymore. It just cancelled those, and in effect that's how it worked. As I understand it, I do stand to be corrected. The problem is that the aircraft, when it's set up, when it gets into the aircraft, into the whole programming of the thing, it was having a problem if you didn't close the aircraft down in another aircraft. So in effect, you'd stop this flight, then you'd have to change into, say, the default Cessna 172 before you close the sim. Otherwise, what happened is you'd have to reassign all your axes again. So there was this issue with control axes reassignment, particularly because of the simulation of the gust lock. Now that, according to Tony, has been fixed. So really, I mean, they were my three key issues. My three key issues were the control assignment issues, the ground idle issues being available in flight, so you could throw yourself out of the air, and then the ailerons requiring significant aileron input and massive aileron trim just to counter the torque from the engines. And of course the issue there was as soon as you started, you could tell it was to do with the engines than the airframe, because it varied massively depending on power. So the more power you put in, the more aileron trim you needed to dial in, and it was a massive, you know, let's not beat about the bush, it was a hugely significant element. So the question mark now is, has Tony and his community patch changed those at all or not? Now there's a couple of ways of knowing that it's Tony's patch, supposed to as opposed to the original one, and they're down here. You've got a pair of ignition lights which will flicker orange in response to the ignition, and an APR override light here which shows when the APR is active, or when the APR override is active. But nonetheless, that's where we're at. A lot of the other stuff has been, as I say, either bug fixes or tidying up the presentation, really. But the three fundamental ones that for me make a big difference to the experience of flying this aircraft are exactly as I've listed. So the ground idle, the aileron issues, and stroke torque from the engine, and the control locks. So what we'll do is we'll get this thing started, jump into the air and see how we get on. So right, let's get ourselves going then. Without further ado, we'll pop a pair of those on and one of those on, and we can just stick our essentials on, make sure that it's all working, the voltage is fine. Let's just reset those. I'm not going to do the checklist per se, I'm just going to make sure that we can get to a position where we can start nice and quickly. Don't know why that's still open, but that needs to be open as well now. That's fine, that's fine. We'll put the navs on for the minute. Left boost pump can go on, that's all fine, that's all good. And then finally a quick check down here, that all looks good. They're both taxi and neutral, so beacons going on. Let's fingers crossed for a good start. It's looking promising. EGT's up, stabilised, back down, RPM's up, and torque is indicating. Wait for the lights to go out. Lights are out, let's do that. Let's just check all of that is fine. SRLs, that's all good. So also here we can get rid of that, make sure we're not creeping forwards, and we're not. Right, so let's get the second engine started then. Reset, that's all fine, that's all fine, that's all fine. Right boost pump on. Doom to doom to doom to doom, let's go. Looks like it's a good start, and it is. Just wait for the lights to go out. Any time today. There we go, right generator on, back to normal, buzz tie reset. Don't need the booster pumps at the minute, so they can go back off. TTLs do need to go on. Prop sync not for takeoff. All of these are fine, all of that's fine, all of that's fine. Stall protection needs to go on, panel essentials go on, TTL test not needed, normal, oil cooler flaps are both auto. All of that's looking good, none of that needs changing, no anti-icing needed, those 4 switches can go on. So the windshield's on warm up at the moment, everything's ready to go. Okay. So that's our start. Let's just get ourselves set up instrument wise. So we can pop that on, pop that, and we need to pop that on as well. For the UK we'll put it to the UK VFR code for conspicuity, which is 7000. Over here we can stick this on, and this on, and just make sure that the avionics are tuned correctly. What we want is 110.1 and 116.4. 116.4 is the Daventry VOR. What we're going to do is we're going to depart out of 05 at Coventry. It is an instrument departure, but it's not a SID as such. It hasn't got as much in the way of height constraints. Then we'll route off to the south. We'll have a mess around with the aircraft to the south, and then what we can do is we can, from there, we can do a recovery back to Birmingham. And let's see if that's fine. That will swing the needle if it's got it right for Honolly. Yes, it has. There we go. So Honolly's over there. Daventry's over there. That's exactly where I would have expected it all to be. So that's us good to go. Right, taxi. You'll note, by the way, before we set off anywhere, aileron trim and rudder trim, and we'll just set the elevator trim to within the green band. But they're all neutral and happy to go, so what we're going to do is we're going to turn out left and taxi to 05, just purely because it's the closest. Now you'll notice as we're taxiing the beta lights are on, so if I advance the throttles you'll see them go out, and the nose dip as we get positive pitch on the blades, which is alpha, and then we come, well, technically beta has some positive pitch, you know, it can be 0 to say 4 degrees or something like that, but actual, if you like, proper driving force comes on when the beta lights go out. Now don't forget as well, one of the fixes was that the ground beta range was not available when you were in the air, so we can test that and see if we can reduce the throttles without the lights coming on, and without it, more importantly, throwing us at the ground. So let's just do a couple of final checks, just make sure everything's all good for let's go. We don't want the prop synchro on for the moment. That's all fine and dandy. What we'll do is a departure out on runway 05. We'll go towards the 145 inbound to Daventry, which is the Charlie Tango beacon, and then away we go. Right, brakes off, a little bit of right hand engine, starboard engine just to help us around the corner. Nothing too dramatic. Turning left, decreasing level, ball to the right on the main instruments. We'll continue slightly further through the turn so that we can do the following. I do love the way the shadows move across the panel. So, turning right, increasing ball left level. Happy days. Shows the instruments are working. Let's get the first stage flaps down. Make sure the levers are fully forward. All the necessary lights are on. Yaw damper can go on. I know there's no traffic, so I'm not going to worry about that nonsense. Okay, so remember the first flaw we had to manage was that horrific aileron input that was required to counter the torque effect. In the first official version of this, let's see how we get on. Right, before we go any further actually, let's put that there, and then you can see if I'm putting any rudder input in. Sorry, not any rudder, any aileron input in. The only difficulty I have is I can't see my ASI with that in the way. So I'm going to have to guess our speed. Because the standby instruments are out my view side, my line of view. So I'd guess we're probably fast enough now, but you can watch if I put any aileron in. No aileron, and it's pretty much not too bad. There we go, a little bit of aileron coming in there. Don't be caught out by the way, don't be fooled. If you look, different aileron, different yoke tops left and right. So without further ado, let's get rid of that. Check our speed 140, gear up, flaps up, clean up. There's a significant nose down pitching moment. So we can trim for that. What we can then do is we can go over here, click heading, ACL indicated airspeed, and we'll pop the autopilot on. Job's a good one. Now, set our speed around a little bit and try and get it up towards 160, which is the best climb speed. So, in summary, what just happened there? Well, apart from the rather tasteful takeoff into the Coventry skies, what's actually happened is that we needed to use virtually no aileron in terms of the takeoff, which is absolutely spot on. We shouldn't be using, other than to control the wind effect, we shouldn't be really using that much aileron. It's not really what it was designed for. Right, so let's bring our power back a little bit, bring it back to about 90. We are levelling as well, so now we can bring props back a little bit, give them a sense of achievement, and we're looking to cross the 145 inbound to Daventry and then turn right to Daventry. We're not going to do that fully, we're not going to fly the whole route, that's not the purpose of this. So as we cross, we will be above the Charlie Tango, so now we can go all the way around, we can intercept the Daventry inbound 145, and we're now approaching 200 knots, so we can bring the power back quite markedly. This is quite a light aircraft, so it's quite quick. It will trundle its way across the ground with quite some aplomb. Okay, so what have we learned? Well, the controls didn't lock out, which is good. The aileron, massive aileron input wasn't required to avoid us throwing ourselves into the ground. And here comes the next bit. If you remember, I mentioned about the beta range, ground beta and going into ground idle, which previously, if I'd done that at even this altitude, it would have been a pain to recover from. Let's see what happens. Boom, throttles closed. Nah, not much drama, is there? We start slowing down, which is what we'd expect. But no lights, no alarms, no bells, no massive changes to everything. What we'll do is we'll get it steady and then we'll do the following. Bang, get rid of the throttles. As the speed starts to decay and the power's off, nose drops, which is quite correct. Apply some power back up, you can see the torque going back up, and I'd expect the nose to rise again in line with the stability of the aircraft. Now the aircraft is described by many, and having flown it I know full well that it's quite stable. I think actually a better way of describing it is quite placid. You know, it's fairly manoeuvrable. There's a video of 6 Navy Jetstreams just at their retirement doing low-level flying down in Devon, which is really quite nice. And I've liked it as a video on my YouTube page. But fundamentally, they're not lacking in agility as an aircraft by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, they're really quite nice aircraft to fly, but they have that airliner stability. However, they also have the fact that they're small enough to be manoeuvrable. So actually, should it be something where it stays exactly where it is? Well, no, because it's not big enough to have that level of stability. You will see it, particularly in harsh weather, doing this. And there's a couple of videos on YouTube where you'll see the landings are scary, quite frankly, that the pilots can get these things to fly in. But fundamentally, you know, it's basically just a mini airliner. Now the systems management is one of the highlights for this. This is really where all the fun is to be had, trying to manage all the dials and gauges to get from A to B. That's fundamentally, from my perspective, the best bit about this. However, we're coming downwind at Coventry. We are very high, so let's get ourselves down. We'll keep the speed on, and what we'll do is we'll just hand fly around to the right. Okay. The last thing really I wanted to mention, having basically said that with the community update all things are fixed, the only thing that really gripes me now, and I say gripes, it's something that I would rather it was better than it is. Most people won't go around and mess around with asymmetric single engine flight or asymmetric engine failures. The rudder in this thing, as you can see, has got a lot of authority, and it has a lot of primary effect followed by secondary effect. So primary effect is the yaw, which I can demonstrate on its own by help of the ailerons, but it's also got the secondary effect, which is roll into the direction of yaw. There you go, look. At which point the passengers have just given me and delivered the contents of their lunch into my lap. So it's got those. It's got a very powerful rudder. However, here's the bit that's a little bit disappointing, really. The yaw in an engine failure. In fact, let's do this. The yaw in an engine failure is the critical factor. Now, basically, what happens? This engine fails. This one keeps going. This one's developing thrust. This one is now developing drag. It's not just a lack of thrust, but it also develops drag. So what happens is you have a very large turning moment. In this case, it would be in the anti-clockwise direction, sorry, is viewed from above. Thrusting, dragging, turning. However, as a result of that, you will get some roll. So predominantly, the roll comes from, more than anything else, the fact that when this wing is flying faster, because it's moving forwards, and this wing is flying slower, this wing develops more lift than this thing, which develops less. So in essence, to get the roll effect, to get significant roll effect, I should say, then in effect what happens is this wing's advancing through the air is the bit that develops the roll. So in effect what you have is that fails, yaw, so the nose will swing to the left, tail to the right, because of this engine pulling and this engine dragging, and then as a result of that this wing flies faster and increases its lift, or improves its lift. This one decreases lift because it's moving slower relative to the airflow. So in theory what you should get is the yaw as the predominant factor, and that's controlled by the pilots using their rudder pedals. And trust me, when you get an engine failure at full power, you can have your legs shaking with the rudder virtually over at the stop at points. But fundamentally, the element of it is the control that you would use for an asymmetric engine failure is predominantly the rudder. Now, yes, you can use the aileron. You can use 5 degrees into good engine bank. So, for example, if this is the good engine trying to drag it, you might want to just cant your vertical axis over to the right, so that in effect you've got 5 degrees angle of bank. However, fundamentally, the main control that you use to control an engine failure is rudder, and that follows on from, as I say, the basic concept that the primary effect that's at work here is the yaw due to the asymmetric thrust lines here. Now, there will be an element of difference of lift, because if you imagine, this is still generating a heck of a good slipstream of air behind it, a good airflow, and that's going to go over the wing at a vastly higher rate of knots in the slipstream effect of the propeller than it is here. So you will get a change in lift profile port to starboard. However, that is nothing compared to the actual predominance of the roll of the yaw, sorry, I should say. The whole thing is generally controlled by rudder, and if it were the other way around, i.e. if it were roll that was the predominant result of an engine failure, you would control it predominantly with aileron. It makes sense. However, watch this. So here we are flying along. I demonstrated it outside using the left and right engines. With the left engine fail, very little yaw, and we've got the roll. In fact, let's put ourselves into a high power setting. Okay. Take the left one away, a little yaw, and then we get the roll. In fact, what we'll do is we'll bring ourselves right down. Bring the speed right down. We'll come back round towards Coventry as well. And then we'll do it once we're at slower speed, because slow speed, high power really demonstrates it, because you've got very limited responsiveness or effectiveness of the rudder at slow speed in a twin engine aircraft. You haven't got the slipstream going from the prop over the rudder the same as you would in a single engine aircraft. So here's 160 knots coming, so let's reintroduce the power. Let's keep the nose nice and high. So full power, so the torque's gone off the scale, and then bring out one. And you can see we get very little yaw response there. Very little yaw response. I can simulate the same thing by having both engines back and then advancing one. And you can see the predominant effect here is yaw, is not yaw, it's roll. So that's one of the few disappointing things, and I think one of the things you've got to expect with anything to do with flight simming, that everything is a compromise. So fundamentally the compromise here is that in order to make the general flying characteristics work, you have to accept potentially that some of the less common, the abnormal characteristics are going to be less well simulated, and in this case that's exactly what we've got. The asymmetric thrust, I mean, you would never ever ever see a real life pilot honing their line proficiency check skills in asymmetric handling using X-Plane 10 or FSX, in my opinion, because the simulation is good, but there's no way a simulator can copy the sheer amount of force that goes through a set of rudder pedals. I mean, there's aircraft that have automatic rudder assist in the event of engine failures, but the sheer force that goes through the rudder pedals has to be felt to be sort of believed, not believed, but to be experienced, so to speak. So consequently, I think it's very difficult for a home simulator to demonstrate that, because just purely because of the fact that the force levels are so extreme, and you can have your right leg shaking or your left leg shaking if it's not something where you're managing to get the trim in particularly quickly. If you haven't got the trim in, then it really does become hard work. So next stage, flaps, gear down, watch out for the balloon, trim accordingly. Have balloon quite a bit there. Doing a visual approach here, can't be bothered with instrument approaches. Once we're stable, we'll select full flap. A little bit high still, need to just adjust the rate of descent accordingly. Speed's coming on a little bit as well, we don't like that. Take the final flap. So yeah, I mean, if you like, most of the key things, it's got a very nose down attitude, this thing, when it comes into land. I don't know if that's my seating position in the aircraft, I think it probably is. However, as I say, all of the features that I think ought to have been fixed have been fixed. What's left is really a very good aircraft with a couple of minor hiccups now, and the minor hiccup for me is that asymmetric handling and my general flying. We're high all the way down this. Look, we've got nearly 1500 feet a minute rate of descent here as we close the ground. Poor visual approach, which poor. It's difficult though when you've got VASIs opposed to PAPIs. PAPIs, by the way, are when you have the 4 lights, VASIs are when you have the 2. You can see how powerful the rudder is because it just... Oh, don't crash on me, there we go. Right, there we go. Back on profile. Need to just trim the last few bits. Now we'll show ourselves as going high. There we go. Okay, so bringing it in on centre line. Bumpy runway, however.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Pitch oscillations, PIOs, not good. Oh, that's a bit of an arrival, really, isn't it? So there you go, guys. As it stands, the community update just changes the aircraft for me. It's a pleasure to fly. It's got all the right handling characteristics. It doesn't throw you out of the sky. The one thing that I would personally say is the only factor left now for improvement is simply the asymmetric thrust in the event of an engine failure. For me, A, it's not dramatic enough, and B, the flip side is it should be something that's controlled by rudder rather than aileron, and the roll factor takes precedence over the yaw with this. Other than that though, does it achieve what it said on the tin? Well, it's got 30 odd improvements, of which the 3 key ones are, in fact 4 key ones really. There are 4 biggies here. The first one is the controls, you don't have to keep reassigning them. The second one is that the aileron, or the torque effect I should say, from the engines doesn't try and throw you into the ground to the point where you use 90% of your aileron trim just on high power climb. And then of course we've got no ground idle in the air, which makes sense really. It's available in the ground, it's not available in the air, which is exactly as it should be. So it's a really nice aircraft to fly. guys, what I would say to you now is, if you haven't already looked at this aircraft, I would suggest it's worth having a look. If you're an X-plane aficionado that likes twin-engine, small regional turboprop airliners, this is smashing. This really is a lovely plane now with the updates. Any concerns I would have had about saying that this is great before are completely alleviated. As I say, I only have one reservation now, and that one reservation is really the fact that I think it's just a shame with the asymmetric thrust response. But everything else, guys, absolutely spot on. This thing is a peach to fly, an absolute peach. And with that note, guys, I shall leave you. In effect, this is my update to the video I made about a year ago, and for me, it's almost finished the whole thing. It's almost finalised it in such a fashion that you know, I struggle to do anything other than say that this is a fantastic aircraft, and the update has just made it that bit more pleasurable and that bit more realistic, more importantly. And with that, guys, I bid you farewell. Have a nice day.